This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community which you now reside.
So you want my opinion about something?
No, just your full name and the community you live in.
My full name? Okay, it's Ann Barris Seeley. And I am 97 years old. I was born in South Orange, New Jersey. I went to school there and in surrounding towns in New Jersey. I went to Smith College, and I was a senior when war broke out.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. So we'll start with your early life. What did you enjoy doing before you entered the military?
I loved to sail. We did a lot of sailing here. I loved to ski. The school where I taught took a 3-week trip to New Hampshire. We had a ski hill beside the lodge where we stayed. It was not a vacation. We had academic classes in the morning, and then people from the Dartmouth Ski Club came over to teach the students in the afternoon. And I had never skied before, and I had some skis that were from World War I, I guess. They were very long, very white, and locked on. So the first thing I had to do was to get some skis that were more appropriate.
Where did you attend college, and how did that affect your military? Like, how did the college you go to get you into the military?
I went to Smith, and it was directly from Smith that I was asked to take this course in cryptanalysis. It was a difficult course. It was totally secret. We couldn't let anybody know that we were taking it. And right after graduation, I was asked to come down and get into the business of trying to solve the Japanese naval code with a lot of other people.
While you were taking this course, was it hard to have a social life at Smith because you had to be so secretive about it?
That's a good question. I don't remember that being a problem. I was a very active, busy person anyway. I was the head of the International Relations Club, for instance, and we had a big conference of many colleges there. Yeah, you could say I was the secretary of a committee to study what to do after the war. And the president of the college was the president of it, and I was the secretary.
Did you ever imagine that you would join the World War II military? Was that ever part of your imagination that you would be part of World War II?
I was kind of a pacifist. And I remember when I was walking on campus one time, and we would try to sell some kind of a flower in honor of peace. And the teacher of Italian said to me, "You're working in ignorance for Hitler." I didn't know what she was talking about then, but I do now.
Interesting.
During this class, did you have to learn Japanese, or did you have to learn a different language in order to decode their...
Good question. We didn't have to learn very much Japanese. We had Japanese translators, but because this is a numerical code, a lot of the work was numerical. But we certainly learned some words. For instance, one that I remember was shogoichi, which meant noon position. A ship would send out a shogoichi message in which they would let their colleagues know what their daily position at noon would be for several days. That was kind of nice for us. Once you got started on that message, it was pretty easy to see where it was going. And the way the messages, when we worked on them, was a sheet about this big. In the code book, there's a frontispiece right here that shows what an additive page looked like. And it was our job to recover the additives. Other people did other things.
Where were you positioned when you decoded these codes?
We were in a huge building that had been, I think, a girls' school. And it was fenced in. It was guarded by Marines. Everything was totally secret. You couldn't talk to anybody outside your own room. And our room might contain about 30 or 40 people at a time.
Where was it? Like, what state and maybe what city were you?
It was in, well, it wasn't exactly in the city of D.C. because it was, what would that be, north of the city? What state would that be?
Maryland.
Maryland. Thank you. So what was your question?
What state or...
Oh, okay, that was the answer to what state it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. During the war, Washington had wonderful streetcars, and they ran all over, and you could buy a pass for a week and travel. It was just wonderful. When we were not working, we had fun, but we worked shifts round the clock, a week of 8 to 4, a week of 4 to 8, a week of 8. The longest time off we had was 48 hours.
What did you tell your family? Because it was so secretive. How did you get away with
It's a
not
really
telling
good
them?
question, you know. to them and anybody else, we said we're working in naval communications. And they assumed that that meant our own communications in some way. And they knew that we couldn't talk about it, but they had no idea there was enemy communications.
What was it like being a woman in the Navy?
It was, well, it was actually fun, but we were kind of, WAVES stood for Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service. And people respected us. We had to wear our uniforms all the time, whether we were at work or not. And we were expected to stand up for the good of the Navy.
When did you actually start decoding these Japanese code? When did your training end and the actual process begin?
The actual process began the minute we got there, got to Washington. The training was all at Smith.
How did the codes get brought to you?
How did they get to us? You know, that's part of the huge, that's why I say I was a cog in a wheel with many, many, many cogs. And we didn't know anything about how they got to us.
What was your proudest moment in your service?
Well, I guess it was, of course, when we won the war, it wasn't because of us. It was because of the bomb. But I was very glad to, although I enjoyed what I was doing, I was engaged to be married. And we had a wedding date set for January 1946. And for a while, it was a question whether I would get out in time, because it takes a little while for everybody to go through the process. And the people who had been in conflict were naturally first in line. And then, at the crucial moment, they lost my papers. And it looked as if I might not get out in time for my own wedding. But finally they found them.
What exactly did you decode, and why were you decoding it?
Well, we were decoding everything that was, this was the principal naval code. So there would be messages from ships, there would be messages from one island. You know, the Japanese had many islands. And of course, during the course of the war, we kept capturing more and more islands. And every time that happened, they would know that that code was compromised, so they'd put in a new one. So it was like constantly reinventing.
Was it numbers that you decoded, or was it words or symbols that you decoded?
They were all 5-digit numbers. The words, a code group might mean a ship name or an English word or a letter, or Japanese had what they call kanji, which are somewhere between a word and a phrase. The in order to prevent what they call garbles, that is mistakes, they had a rule that the sum of the digits of a code group had to be divisible by 3. Doesn't mean every item in that 5-digit code group was, but the total. So you had to become very good at mentally adding as many as 5 numbers and knowing whether it was divisible by 3. That made it easier for us because if we were trying out an additive, here goes a column of, here's a whole bunch of messages. At the top there's this additive or a space for an additive. It was our job to recover that. But if we had an idea for where a certain code group might be, we did something called zeroizing and adding, so that you could very quickly run your suggested additive down the column, and if you came to any garbles, you knew it wasn't right.
While you were decoding and while you were with these women, were there any dark moments?
I don't think so. We were pretty much removed from the fighting front, you could say, and we were young, 21, in Washington, D.C. We had a lot of fun in our spare time, and because we worked in shifts, we could go to places like tennis courts that normally would be very crowded, or we could go canoeing on the Potomac and stuff in our free time. So we tended to sleep less than we should, but we had a huge pot of coffee at work.
Were there any challenges that were hard to overcome while you were decoding these papers that the Japanese had?
Any
Challenges.
challenges? Well, I think the whole thing was a challenge. But you kind of, it was you against them, and you sort of welcomed the challenge.
What was your most significant achievement during the war?
I don't think any particular one was more important than any other. A lot of the messages that we were working on were not very high priority. They did have a priority room where certain people worked, and some of my friends worked. I think if I had less fun outside, I might have been in the priority room.
Did you ever go anywhere besides D.C.?
Yes. My my husband, when we were, we were courting, you might say, and he was a pacifist, and he was a conscientious objector, and he was in a variety of different conscientious objector camps. The last one of which was being in Baltimore, where there was a mental hospital, and some of those people had tuberculosis. And the time came when David, I think he was influenced mainly by the book Berlin Diary. But, of course, I'd been pushing my point on him for quite a while, too. But the time came when he realized Hitler really, this is not any old war. Hitler has to be stopped. And I don't want other people dying to do what I should be doing. So he asked to be changed to 1A, which meant he would be drafted immediately. And he was. So we said goodbye. The next day, I got a phone call, and the operator said 25 cents, please. And it turned out that he was at Fort Belvoir, which was not very far away at all. So I used to go out and visit him when I could get away. Then he finished basic training, and he was sent to a combat engineer school. That turned out to be even nearer. It was right inside Washington, D.C. So we saw each other pretty regularly then. But then he has finished that course, and he was due to be shipped out. And he probably wouldn't have survived because the combat engineers were the ones who would first land on an island and just sort of set up the picture for the troops to come in. But as it turned out, he had pleurisy. TB doesn't hurt, but pleurisy does. And so they x-rayed him, and it turned out he did have TB. So he was right away discharged and sent to a veterans hospital near Beacon in upstate New York. So, yes, did I travel up there on my miserable little 48-hour then the time came when his father died, and his mother badly needed somebody to take care of. And there was a very good TB doctor near where they lived. So they let him go home and be cared for there. Then that was a really easy trip from Washington.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to now your post-military life. You said that this was all very secretive. How long after the war had ended could you talk about this?
That's a very good question, too. And I actually don't remember, but we were totally secret about it. I never told my husband, my parents, or anybody. But where we were when the news kind of came out in Time magazine, we were living in Vermont, in a little tiny town. But I didn't make a whole lot out of it then, because, that was something you did then, and that was done, and people weren't making much of it the way they are now.
How did serving in World War II affect your later life?
That's a good question. I think it taught me to appreciate hard work, and knowing that you couldn't always have what you wanted. But I did have a lot of what I wanted later on in my life.
How did it feel to be able to tell your story?
And it's funny that I don't really remember that either. But what I do remember is the woman who wrote this book, Liza Mundy, she was wanting to write about it. One of my sons found somewhere on the internet a request for names of people who had been code breakers, and my son sent her email to me, and so I answered, and then she didn't live too far away. I invited her to come here, and she came, and we just sat down by the river there and talked about it. And then she came again, and this time she brought her 19-year-old daughter with a laptop, and she wrote a lot of what I said. I think that's why my name appears quite a lot, especially toward the end of the... I'm just starting to read the book now.
What was your most vivid memory?
Of everything?
Of while you're in the war.
Oh, while I was in the war. I don't think I remember. One thing I remember, which had nothing to do with the Navy as such, but then he wasn't my fiancé because we were not engaged yet, and he was at a kind of peace conference that was being held in Washington, and when I had time off, I went with him to some of the discussions. And at one point, a group of us went out to lunch, and we went to a drugstore that served lunch. And one of our number was African American. They refused to serve us. We were all staying and, going to make a big thing of it. But I noticed somebody go out to the telephone, and pretty soon an officer came up to me and said, "You must get out of here, otherwise you'll be guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman." Can you imagine? So we've made a few advances since then.
Do any of the skills you learned in the military still apply to your life after service?
I think probably just the ability to keep at something, even if it's not the most pleasant thing that you would like to do. But I've had lots of times when I was doing things that were pleasant, like teaching or skiing or singing. And singing is something that I've been doing for a long time. Since 1984, I have been in the Chatham Chorale, and our big Christmas concert is tomorrow.
What do you think about women serving in the military today?
I think it's great that they do, and I think it's great that they achieve some positions of importance, which was not the case in my day.
We want to thank you for taking the time to have this interview with us, and we want to thank you for your service in the military.
Thank you.